So, talk to us about the solar eclipse that's going to happen on April 8th.
Sure.
As always, there are some people that are freaking out,
Yeah.
but of course, most people are just excited to see it. What is really going to happen?
Sure. Yeah. So this is something that I've taught quite a bit about working at Fisk Planetarium, getting my degree in astrophysics, and ever since then, continuing to teach. And it makes sense why people might freak out about something like this, right? Because in real life, I think we were chatting about this earlier today, if you just stay in your hometown, it's pretty unlikely that you'll ever see a solar eclipse in your entire lifetime at all. In reality, on the planet, they happen several times a year, I think like 2 to 5 times in a year across the planet. So they're not uncommon on a global scale, but on a local scale, they're basically anomalies. So if you think about a person, living on the savannah or out in the wild or building up a civilization a couple thousand years ago, all of a sudden the sun goes dark, and if you're Chinese, you think a dragon's going to eat it. If you're Mayan, maybe you think that the gods are angry at you and you need to sacrifice some people. So you don't know what's going on. So of course people might freak out about it, and those people will probably be around for all eternity. Crackpots will always exist, and that's fine. But it's not really that big of a deal. It's an anomaly, though, because the reason we get eclipses is totally unique, at least in the solar system, but definitely in general, because the only way you can get an eclipse, so if you're the sun, right, if you're my star, and this is the moon, we got the earth, depending on how close the moon is between the earth and the sun, it's going to cover up different amounts, right? So if it's right up on your eyeball, it's covering up everything. If it's super far away, right, I can still see your face. That makes sense, right? So our moon, the moon, is at just the right distance between us and the sun that it looks the apparent same size. It has the same apparent size, as astronomers would say. So we get a perfect eclipse. Now, some folks might remember that in October, conveniently 6 months ago, not convenient at all because it's a half-year cycle, we had an annular eclipse. And the only difference between an annular and a solar eclipse is just that the moon's slightly closer. So because it's closer again, it's farther away from us. So same thing, if it's close, I can cover up your whole head. If this moon is farther away, I can still see some of your face. So the moon's a little bit farther, so it doesn't cover up all of the sun. That's an annular eclipse. What's happening in April is a total eclipse, so it's covering up the whole thing. The reason that these things don't happen like every new moon, because that's what a new moon is. The moon's, if you're the sun, the new moon is when the moon is between us and the sun, and then a full moon is when the moon's on the opposite side. So it's reflecting light off the sun, bounces back on Earth, and we can see the whole thing. So why doesn't a solar eclipse happen every time the moon's on this side? If you remember that the Earth is not in the same plane, so if it goes around, right, in like a disc shape, it's tilted 23.5 degrees. That's why we have seasons, right? So the Earth is tilted, but the path of the moon is also offset by 5 degrees, actually. The plane of which the moon orbits is offset from the plane that the Earth orbits around the sun. So because they're slightly different, we don't always get an eclipse. Sometimes the moon passes kind of under that ecliptic plane. We call it an ecliptic plane. And sometimes it's over, and sometimes it's in the right spot. So again, it's not super uncommon, but that's why it can vary how often it happens, 2 to 5 times a year. So this one, some folks might remember that in 2017, I think both of us saw this eclipse. You were in Wyoming, and I was in Salem, Oregon at the time. That one went from northwest down to southeast, I think, through Texas in 2017. This one here that we can see that's going to happen on April 8th, 2 Mondays from now, at time of recording, it starts in Texas, southwest, and then it'll pass up through Maine. So a couple of hot spots. Texas is going to be a really great spot. A lot of spots in Ohio as well. Little Rock, Arkansas is going to be a great spot. And then if you live up closer north, you'll be able to see totality. Now, it is worthwhile to mention that you will be able to see a eclipse. Like, you'll be able to see something happen. If you have your solar glasses or a solar filter telescope, or I think you use a welding cap, right?
A welding lens.
Lens, yeah.
Yep.
So, and I think that's brilliant. I mean, they're meant to protect your eyes from like harsh light from fire and stuff like.
Yeah, from a weld arc.
Welding. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, weld arc. So, same thing. As long as you can protect your eyes, anywhere in the United States, you can see part of the moon covering the sun. This path that we're displaying here is just where you can see a perfect totality. Now, I do recommend that everyone see a solar eclipse, a total solar eclipse, at least once in their lifetime, because they are magical events. The whole entire plane all around you dims and chills slightly. It's like the whole earth goes quiet. The animals go quiet. All of nature silences, and it's like a transcendent event almost. The whole entire cosmos is lining up, and it's like magic. And you can totally imagine why ancient peoples would have very, very extravagant and maybe even fanatical reactions to these things, like a dragon eating the sun, and they would have rituals and ceremonies to try and get the sun back, because what happens if the sun's gone? No crops, no food, no civilizations, and we're all toast. So the sun's pretty important. So when it gets covered up, that's a big deal. Now, when you see the eclipse, it's not actually, it's kind of funny after saying all that, what's actually happening, because the totality of itself is only 4 minutes. So the eclipse will start around midday on Monday, depending on what your time zone is. I think we saw around noon. Yeah, like around 12 o'clock or so in Texas. You can check for your local times depending on where you're going to be. And the event, like from when the moon and the sun just first start like lining up, is going to be to when the moon's totally past the sun. That's like 4 hours. But totality, where it's like perfect 1-to-1 cover, that'll be about 4 minutes. It's just enough time to listen to Pink Floyd's Eclipse song and experience the whole thing, which I do highly recommend. That song was designed and composed for an eclipse, and it's, if you listen to the lyrics deeply about it, actually part of those lyrics are rephrased and paraphrased in chapter 9 of my book, because they're very existential, and it's a spiritual experience almost, going through an eclipse, and it really gets captured with the music. So that would be definitely something to look forward to. And then the last thing in terms of science, before we get into, if you guys have any more questions, why are these events useful? Like, why is it important for these? I mean, it's a cool event to go to, bring some friends, bring some illicit substances if you want to, but these are actually useful celestial events. And one notable example of that is with the famous Einstein. We use solar eclipses to verify his general relativity. And we did that because when you take pictures of the sky, you can see stars, right? Just, normal in the sky, that are normally obscured by the sun. You can't see them because the sun's so bright, you can't see the stars past the sun. Like, you'd have to wait till night when the sun's gone to see those stars. When the moon eclipses the sun, it's dark and you can see those stars for a second. And if you take photos when the sun is there and isn't there, you'll see that the stars move. Why? Because the gravity from the sun is creating a dent in the fabric of space-time, and the light from those stars is bending around the sun. So you can see stars that should be like behind the sun. So if you're looking at me here, like the star would be like here, but the light's bending around so you can see it. It's called gravitational lensing. So that in of itself was one of the ways that we were able to verify general relativity. So it's actually like you can do experiments with solar eclipses. And there's a lot of science that you can do, but at the same time, it's just a fun thing to check out. So I think you were telling me some stories. You've seen more eclipses than I have, actually.
Well, I'm a lot older than you, too.
That's true. That's fair.
So I seen one on the East Coast when I was a kid. I didn't remember what age I was, so I looked it up. And it seems like there was one there in 84. And I did.
There's 94, I think, and 88 when we checked. There's one 94 for sure, but you were in Colorado, I think, at that time.
Yes. There was some but I was in California. Yeah, Colorado. And then the one in Wyoming, which
2017.
which just felt like a couple years ago, but it's already been 7 years.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's crazy. A couple things that you had mentioned that I didn't remember until you mentioned them. It did get colder.
Yes.
And then it got windy.
Yeah. So that can vary, I guess, depending on where you're at. Like if you're in the plains or in the mountains, there's trees or whatever. But yeah, the whole cold, because our heat is infrared light from the sun. No sun, no heat, no UV radiation, no radio rate, no gamma rays, no visible light, no light, no heat. Like death. It's scary a little bit. Like the whole
so
world
the temperatures
goes dark.
affected the wind, and you know, 'cause
Yes.
the wind kind of plays off temperatures a little bit
Absolutely.
sometimes.
Yep. Mhm.
Yeah, it was.
yeah.
It was pretty amazing when you factor in all those instances or all those items.
Yeah.
And then
The whole world.
the bending of the light
Yeah.
thing, I didn't know that. So that's nuts. So you can see something that's behind something because the way, wow.
If it's massive enough. And this is so this is mostly just done like it's got to be big. Like even the sun, which is so you could I have to check the math and people can correct me in the comments, but the mass of the earth is 10 to the 24 kilograms. The mass of the sun is 10 to the 30 kilograms, so it's a factor of 6. That's a million, like 6 zeros. 1 million times more massive. That doesn't sound right. We check that actually. I want to get that wrong.
So what does that
For
do
everyone.
then? So anyways,
So the point is, the
Yeah.
more massive the object is, the more it'll dent space-time. 31, I think, is the factor. So it's a
Sun
10
versus
million.
Earth.
Yeah, 10 million. 10
It's-
million.
It's not. It's 99.8% the mass. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong thing.
It's the majority of the mass in the solar system.
Yeah, it's more than 333,000 times that of the Earth.
Oh, I was off by. I was too big actually. I said a million. It was 300,000.
Yeah.
well, what does it do?
333,000.
What's the effect then? Anyways, I mean, despite
Sure.
the math.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. So, and the reason I brought up the number is just because the sun's relatively small compared to a galaxy or a cluster of galaxies, which have billions of stars. So that's when we do the research with gravitational lensing. That's when it's most effective. Or black holes, because they are areas of extremely dense gravity. So that's one way that you can see like through things. And that's why we call it a lens, because the light literally gets focused like it does with a glass lens. And you can see things around that curvature because matter tells space-time how to curve, and that tells light how to move through space-time.
Yeah, for those of us who know nothing about this is just
Wild. It's
It's
wild
wild.
for researchers too. Like, yeah, it's
Yeah.
pretty. That's a new-ish discovery too. And when I say new, I mean within the last century. That's recent history to me.
So when these things occur, like these solar eclipses, and they have these paths, there's tons of people who are just looking at it like, wow, they're checking it out. But then you have tons and tons of other people on telescopes and scientists and astrophysicists and all these other people who are just like, they're collecting data.
Yes.
They're just following this thing. They're like data, 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 data.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing. I don't think we
Yep.
ever think about that. That's happening at that same time because what would there be to collect, we would think. But then everything you explain makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the general rule is, I mean, the thing we use to collect data in astronomy is light, right? So as long as you can see an event happening, you can always kind of collect data. And what the use for that would be, I think modern day use would be more studying the moon than anything else. And that's not necessarily dependent on an eclipse, right? Because you can see the moon anytime. But there are experiments and things that you can do. I think we're a little bit past that at this point, since we've gotten to the point where we can verify gravitational waves, and we're pretty well into understanding. Because the thing I brought up with the general relativity and Einstein, like you have to remember, that's like early 1910s ish. So more than a century ago at this point. And we've progressed quite a bit since then. But yeah, I mean, there are people who look up at the sky for a living. That's just what they do.
Right.
And there's plenty of stuff to collect because it's a very vast universe.
Yeah. So what are you going to do for the solar eclipse?
Yeah, so I've got a few members of my planetarium committee who are doing a couple different things. Our astronomer, Timothy Hatchett, he's going down to Texas, I believe. He's he's taught in a lot of the community colleges locally here. He's currently working with middle schoolers, but he's a professional astronomer, so he's going to take up his telescope and take some photos for us, I think. He just got a brand new solar camera telescope. So hopefully he'll get some good shots that we can share with the public there. Our video jockey, or guy with Dome Masters, Timmy Edens, I think he's got a festival event thing that he's going to in Texas. And then our secretary/manager, Kate Hall, she's going to Arkansas, I believe, with a couple friends. I haven't made plans to see the eclipse. I talked tentatively with a couple of folks, but since I saw the one in 2017, I know what's happening, and it wouldn't be, I can't justify it as a business expense. I usually only travel if it's tax deductible these days, so I didn't make any plans to go. There might be something potentially that could happen, but I don't have any plans for it. I'll probably go outside when it happens.
How far of a drive would that be for us from Denver?
It's only 14 hours to Arkansas. It's not far. It's not far at all. Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know.
It's a fun road trip. The last time I was in Arkansas was for a world's competition for Taekwondo. And I haven't been back since then. We drove that way, and it was a piece of cake. So
sure, yeah, I've driven to Texas a bunch from here. Yeah.
Texas would work too. Yeah, Texas be close.
It's the same distance. No, it's about 14 hours.
Is it? Okay.
To Dallas Fort Worth? Yeah.
Okay, haven't driven.
So,
Texas. All right.
In that path where everybody has totality, and then you have, if you just kind of went off of that square to like let's say up towards Washington State and then down to Florida, what are they going to see in those corners?
Great question. So I'm going to throw some vocabulary at you just because I remembered it. So there are two main parts of a solar eclipse called the umbra and the penumbra. Umbra meaning like the middle dark spot. That's where totality is. The penumbra is the outer, like the periphery of that. And so what you're seeing here is the totality path. So if you imagine just like the darkest path is that line, right? And then it just gets a little bit brighter and like less gray, less black, more gray, and then just lighter. So by the time, like for Florida, for example, I mean, I'm just eyeballing it here, but maybe you could see like half of an eclipse from there, roughly.
So Colorado about the same.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it would be really interesting too, if there are any folks who are watching this, if you're watching this after the eclipse, or if you have plans to go to the eclipse, it'd be cool to like hear. So be safe. Obviously, you can purchase solar filter glasses fairly cheaply. You can get them actually at Fisk Planetarium if you're up in Boulder. Not a paid advertisement. I just love them. So check them out. And they also sell copies of my book too, which you can check out. But get solar filter glasses or some type of eye protection. And take photos if you can, or use a little pin cover. You could use something like a colander or just holes in leaves. You could see the eclipse happening, but take pictures and share your experience to see like how much of the sun is actually being covered up where you are in the country. I'd be really interested to see like the percentage of the sun that you can actually see covered up by the moon. But yeah, I don't really know based on like location of the country, like how far north or west, south or east you'd have to be away from that path to see a certain amount. I just know that you can see something everywhere in the U.S. And the closer you are to totality, obviously, the better the view.
Nice. That's
so
yeah, good point. Yeah. Anybody watching this, let us know. Let us know where you were at when you seen it. If you leave a comment after the eclipse, and if before the eclipse, let us know where you're going to be when it happens.
Yeah, and if you have any questions or like if you haven't been big on astronomy but you really love space and you want to learn more about some of the science behind this, then feel free to reach out and maybe we can like see if we can answer some comments too, folks, if they have deeper questions. But enjoy the event, have fun with it, travel with some friends, and I mean, see one. You want to see one eclipse in your lifetime. It is worth it. Absolutely. I sound like I'm not making a big deal out of it. Like, oh, I saw one a couple years ago. I don't need to see another one. But I mean, go for it. If you got the extra expenses, don't break the bank. Don't go into debt to fly out and see a solar eclipse. But if you can afford to, highly recommended. Highly, highly recommended. Absolutely.
I do too. Yep, absolutely. All right, everybody, enjoy the eclipse.
Absolutely.